Good evening, everyone. Tonight is September 20th, 2023. I would like to call to order a joint City Council and Planning Commission meeting. It is 6:04 p.m. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would someone like to make a motion to approve our meeting agenda for tonight?
This is Lynn. I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
And is there a second?
This is Judy, I'll second.
So it's moved and seconded. Our next, I'll call for the vote. Sorry, Sue?
Sue, aye.
Ron, aye.
Lynn, aye.
Janet, aye.
Judy, aye.
Barb, aye.
And Jesse, aye.
Oh, forget Robin.
Oops. Oh, sorry. And Robin. Welcome, Robin. Sorry.
Bethany's online too, I think.
All right. And now we're on to a motion to approve the August 2nd, 2023 Joint City Council and Planning Commission meeting minutes. Is there a motion?
This is Lynn. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from August 2nd, 2023.
And a second?
This is Barb. I'll second that.
It's moved and seconded. Are there any questions or discussion on those minutes?
Nope.
If not, I'll call for the vote.
Sue, aye.
Ron, aye.
Lynn, aye.
Janet, aye.
Judy, aye.
Barb, aye.
Robin, aye.
And Jesse, aye. We're already on to number 5, public open forum. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak on the public open forum or online who would like to speak? Seeing none, we'll move on to number 6. And this is a presentation and a discussion of ARPA, Animal Wellness Center, non-binding concept review, pages 1 through 11, and enclosure A in our packet. I believe we have Elizabeth Gigler, who would approach the bench, pull your microphone right up so that we can hear it echo, and explain to everybody what you're proposing for us.
Sure. I'm Elizabeth Gigler.
Pull that mic up a little closer.
Do you need my address?
Yep, for the record, please.
10704 Stutz Street in Circle Pines.
Thank you.
So we're here today proposing, what's the address? 15161 Feller to do a animal wellness center. And basically in your packet, you'll kind of get an idea about us. The presentation starts with a little blurb about us. Rescued Pets Are Wonderful is the organization that I run. We started in 2004.
Rescued Pets? Oh, she's actually in like a meeting. I'm not, this is like.
Whoops.
So we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Basically, we're foster-based animal rescue. And we're looking to expand to include our own wellness center or veterinary center. And so we switched over in 2020 to focus on major medical cases and senior pets instead of just really healthy adoptable animals. And so the use of veterinary facility has become super important for us. And so the biggest part of us...
Can you mute them, please? Is it on the telephone, maybe? Is it on the telephone? The call-in?
Mute.
I'm muted.
They're all muted.
Okay. Sorry.
That's okay. The reason that we're looking into this is I'm also a veterinary technician, so I've worked in the field for over 12 years. And since COVID, there's been a huge strain in the profession. As this next slide shows, you've likely heard from family or friends, or maybe you yourself, have had complaints about how long it is to get your animal into veterinary care. And then the same with the emergency facilities. And so unfortunately, the state of the profession is strained and understaffed. And so it's very difficult for just the everyday public to get into the vet clinics. And so rescues, we still have the same amount of animals coming in that need veterinary care, but that puts additional strain on the veterinary community on top of the clients that they're already trying to see. We have worked with multiple different veterinarians, specialists, whatnot. And they, we see it all over the board. So basically, we have decided that if we open our own wellness center, veterinary center, that we can
Am I being
alleviate.
ignored now or what?
That we can alleviate some of the pressures on the local veterinary clinics and then be able to get our animals in and cared for in a timely manner. So basically,
What happened to your head?
The second guy.
Continue, go ahead.
yep. So the next slide is just causes as to why the veterinary community is strained. COVID, obviously, pet adoptions rise during COVID, and then the shortage of staffing. And so the way that our facility can help with this is we have a few different phases that we'd like to do. Basically, the first phase is to have an operating veterinary facility that we can use for our rescues animals. Once we're up and running with that, we'll offer it to other
Is that okay if I
rescue
get my dog
organizations.
upper deckies?
And so other rescue organizations can then use our services as well. And so that would mean that takes that stress off of other clinics as well. And then finally, our final phase, we would like to be able to offer a low-cost preventative care only option to the public residents. It would be a set amount of hours, limited. It wouldn't be your everyday, you can just come in and make an appointment. It would be, here's the hours of our low-cost vaccines. We kind of did that on the services slide. We'd offer spay neuter, regular vaccines, heartworm tests or feline leukemia tests, lab testing, and x-ray if needed. And then we also put physical therapy on here because we will be able to offer that as well to the surrounding clinics that do orthopedic surgeries. I know South Shore is a big one in the community. They do a lot of orthopedic surgeries, but then they're overwhelmed with post-op care, so we could partner as that as well. So those are just kind of the services that we would offer to the community, but that would be in like the phase 3. We do have a wellness center layout that we designed, kind of a rough guess of what it would look like. This is the facility that we're hoping to lease. Currently, it's just a 3,000 square foot open showroom. And so we would have to come in and provide a build out for that. So we kind of just gave you an idea of what it would look like. And then the other 3,000 square foot that would be connected to this, it's more of a warehouse space. It's not really an inside facility. That would be for storage for our supplies for what we have right now. Currently, we're leasing a building in Blaine that's the same situation. And so it just, we have more stuff that we've collected since 2004 than we have available for a storage facility. And so we did put in here exterior changes. I know at the previous meeting that me and Steve were at, there was some questions about, what we could do to optimize the facility on the outside. Granted, we're not going to be the owners. We would be leasing, but we would be more than willing to discuss with the owners some different ideas that we can do to make the building look more appealing. Right now, it's just white. And so signage would be a thing. I know that some of the people had asked if there could be some awnings put on. This is just a rough sketch. We also included some landscaping. everything is kind of up in the air right now. As you know, we're a nonprofit organization, so, you know, these are going to be phases, and it's not something that we've completely designed yet, because it all depends on where we end up. So wherever we end up leasing, we had to do the same thing with the current facility we're at. And so we're not really going to dig down our heels and make these finalized plans, but we're more than willing to talk to the city and residents and see what they're interested in. So that's pretty much what I have, but I'm willing to take any questions you have.
Thank you. Who has
I
questions?
do have some questions.
Yep, for sure.
Sue, go ahead.
And I'm looking for a rescue dog. I've been on your website.
Okay.
Bengal was one of them. but
Okay.
Anyway. I guess my question, so I went to your website. Right now, you don't do those services. You are, because it's not open to the public. You're
Correct.
just a rescue, and that's
Yep.
it. And you don't do any veterinary services at your
Nope.
current location?
So no, the current location is not. This would be a whole new endeavor for us to actually have an animal wellness center. And so there would be a veterinarian on the board. We don't currently have one. We have one that's ready to get on the board. And then there would have to be specific licensing through the state for this clinic to be available. So in the state, it's required for whoever to own a private veterinary clinic to be a licensed veterinarian. You can't just say, I want to own a clinic and I'll hire a vet. You have to be the vet. But when it comes to a nonprofit organization, you can have a vet on the board and then they assume the responsibility of the clinic. But ultimately, so that's what like the Humane Society has or Secondhand Hounds has. There are multiple animal rescues are going this way simply because there just isn't availability. And there's no way we can move our animals through if we can't get them vetted.
Okay, so if you did, once you do the veterinary services, then the vet would be performing the
Yep.
spay and neuter
Yep.
and those kinds of things? And
Yep.
would the procedure be the same as if you went to a vet?
Correct. This would be a fully functioning veterinary clinic.
Okay,
In that's what that build out would be. It would have all the equipment, it would have anesthesia machines, you know, and it would operate that way. So originally we would have vets come in, well, the one that's on the board she would be assuming responsibility of the clinic, but there would be other veterinarians that could come in as relief and volunteer their time, and then we would just provide the supplies.
okay. I did notice that you didn't have an area, I mean, you have an area for the dogs, the cats, lobby, blah, blah, blah. But where do the dogs get their exercise?
Sure, so they're not staying here long-term. This would be like just their medical care, but there is I think it's almost an acre behind the property, or 2 acres, that will be fenced in different sections. It's a grass-filled area right now. And so that's where we would have, like, it's a pet relief area for them to go to the bathroom, that kind of stuff. Or if they did need to stay overnight, they would be able to go out there. But it would never be, you know, we wouldn't just let them out the back like you do at home. They would always be supervised.
Okay, but you would plan to have them outside, not just to relieve themselves, but maybe to get a little exercise?
Oh, sure,
or-
while they're staying, yep.
Okay. What was my other question? I think that's all I have for right now. I know there's going to be more questions because and somebody else can speak to this more, that it's not in our ordinance
Yep.
as a use, so.
Ron, any questions?
I have a few questions. How many dogs or animals do you plan to keep overnight, or what are you looking at?
So it wouldn't be like a boarding facility. It would just be if they had surgery and, you know, either surgery went too late and they needed to stay over for that reason, or if they were there for physical therapy, which could be a week or so. But there wouldn't be, I would say, 3 to 5 dogs at a max, and maybe 3 to 5 cats, but we wouldn't be full all the time. It's not going to be a shelter.
And then another question, so most of these animals that are coming in, they have owners?
Nope. So, well, for the beginning purposes, it would be just for our rescued animals. So they don't have owners. But once we would get to phase 3, we would open up the services, but those animals wouldn't be staying overnight. Oh, yeah. They're there for medical care purposes. They're not just getting surrendered off the street and dropped off like it's a shelter.
Okay. And I have to maybe ask Elizabeth, or maybe Janet knows, or who inspects these places? We had that issue.
Yeah, so actually, that was going to be a question that I had for Megan, because it's kind of a hybrid. So as our applicant mentioned, veterinary hospitals are under the jurisdiction of the state, but then there's this other aspect of your business. So maybe you can speak to that, because that was a question I had too.
Yes, so we would need to do some research in terms of figuring out what the sort of the Venn diagram of licensing
Yeah, so
requirements are.
I've had multiple discussions with people currently at our facility. We still have to report to the Board of Animal Health. We still have to have a kennel license. We still have to be inspected every year, even though we're not a vet clinic. We have animals in our custody, and so the board comes out, they just gave us one in May, I think, for the one we're at. So you not only have to be regulated by the Board of Animal Health, but sometimes the USDA, I know, has to be involved with that kind of thing. So it's more than just a city kennel license or whatever you guys do for your vet clinic. I don't think Columbus has a vet clinic, but I know that working for clinics, you know, some of them are required to have a kennel license, but the Board of Animal Health is very strict on making sure that they come out and do their inspections. So that would be definitely.
I have one more, just to clarify things. So where are these animals coming from? I mean, I find a dog, I can bring it over to your place, or?
So no, our animals come through animal control. So they're from local impound. Most of them come from St. Paul currently. For our rescue, we do pull from Minneapolis every now and then. A lot of times animals are surrendered to local vet clinics for euthanasia, and they don't feel that the dog or cat needs to be euthanized, that it's a treatable condition, so they'll contact us for that. But we very rarely in our group take owner surrenders just because the impounds keep us so busy.
Well, so you're not housing them?
Nope.
So do they have foster homes then?
Yep, we're an all foster-based rescue.
Oh, so every animal that's coming in there has a home somewhere,
Yep.
even though it's foster?
Correct, or they go to a boarding facility.
And this is not a boarding facility? Okay, thank you. I
Yep.
have no other questions.
Yeah,
Oh, Lynn?
Lynn?
No, I don't have any questions. I got mine answered already.
Yeah, you answered a lot of my questions as well. So do you have a sense of how many animals you're going to be trying to process? I know it's a phased thing. So
Sure.
initially you're going to try to provide services for your animals that
Yep.
are in foster, and then potentially open it up to the public. So how much or how big do you expect this to grow? How big do you expect
Sure.
it to be?
So our rescue is very small considering the other groups in the metro. You know, we probably do, when we switched over from all intake to only major medical, we probably take in 200 dogs and 200 cats per year. And so that kind of gives you an idea, you know, kittens, it's kind of an influx. You know, I just took in 16 today that came in multiple groups. And so it kind of waxes and wanes. But I would say that as far as when we're just doing our animals, we would maybe have 2 days a week where we would be there working. And I would say maybe 10 at the max for that week. There may be specific events where, you know, we open it up to other rescues and it would be a little bit different. It all depends on the schedule when the veterinarians are available. And then once we open it up to the public, it would be specific days and specific times, and then we would just schedule it out like normal. So the surgery schedule, you know, a lot of the low-cost surgery clinics do a high volume. That's why they do what they do. And so, you know, they do 30, 40 spays or neuters in a day. I don't see us doing that. But what I do want is to make it available, because we are constantly contacted by people who, oh, I found this stray and now it's pregnant and now it has this litter, and we're like, we're maxed. And then 6 months later, they call back and they say, well, all those kittens just had kittens, or now I have this many, or somebody dropped 3 more off. And if they are just able to bring their animal in and have them spayed or neutered, they can take care of them. So the idea of opening it up to a lower cost option for that area, preventative only. We're not looking to, have a full business here. We have our own business, but to make it available so that people can have that option. I don't see it being high scale by any means.
So if you have an animal that comes in and it's, for shots or heartworm, and then there's a bigger issue that's found, like it usually is, oftentimes, they usually will do an exam before they
for
do,
sure.
then what do you do?
So that would be discussed with the owner, and they would be referred to the appropriate place, depending on where they are. A lot of the veterinarians that will be, I can tell you that I'm sure that even though we open it up to your residents, that won't be the only people that will come. They're going to drive because they already do. The only ones that are available are in Minneapolis and Minnetonka right now, or Eden Prairie. And so, the people that are coming in to volunteer their time as a veterinarian are going to be working somewhere as well. And so, there is that contact where they can say, if you want to further diagnosis or work this up, or they're coming because they couldn't get into their regular clinic, and we say, hey, XYZ is going on, please make an appointment with your regular clinic. Or as far as if it's a specialty thing, then it needs to get sent to a referral clinic.
So if you do have animals overnight, are you going to have staff overnight as well?
There will be someone staying. Yep, for sure.
Okay, I just lost my train of thought. I hate it when that happens. I'll move on to Judy, and if it comes back, I will raise my hand.
I think you've done an excellent job of
Thank you.
knowing what you're talking about with answers.
I try to come educated.
Oh, I know what I was going to ask. Sorry. So I am so sympathetic to the whole shortage in the vet industry. It's also an industry that I used to work in a long time ago too. So I know places like the Humane Society have put in place their own vet tech training so that they can train their own.
Correct.
So how do you feel you're going to be able to recruit and retain staff in a way that's different than what that you're not going to run into the same problems?
For sure. So being a technician for the last 12 years, I'll tell you that the issues that surround technicians specifically, and veterinarians too, is the fact that you feel like you're not getting anywhere. And not only, aside from the clientele, morale is very low. They're not happy about anything. They complain about everything, but they're frustrated, and so that aside, I feel like in the veterinary world, you don't see yourself moving forward. You go to work, you try to do what you love, and then you go home, and then you do it again, and you're not really getting anywhere. For this to be a facility that you can see people that really need this and be able to see that, okay, I fixed 20 cats this week, that's going to be 20,000 less next year. It's more of a vision that you can see in the future. I'm definitely not trying to say that this is going to be the best. Rescue has its own issues. You see a lot of things. You'll see a lot of things that come in where people will want to come to low cost and their animal hasn't seen a vet in 10 years or a bath, and so those are also hard. You have to have that. And I'll say that as far as technicians go, I have plenty that are willing to put forth their time to do this. So, it's just burnout. It's the same as human nurses, and you try to churn them out as fast as you can. But unfortunately, there are no technician schools here except for one in Wilmer.
Yeah.
And so when the 3 shut down, nobody's even being trained. So, you either have to go to Wisconsin or Iowa, or you're going to go to Wilmer. And so, it's just hard all around. While people scramble to try and figure out the community. But if we can take that pressure off of the stuff that the clinics in the surrounding area, don't necessarily need to have their hands in, where they can focus on their clients, I think that that's going to make a huge difference for them. And it wouldn't just be my employees, it would be their employees. So.
Are you using the services, the preventative care services as part of your fundraising strategy?
Yep, and the spay neuter. There's lots of fundraising initiative for grants for spay neuter stuff. But yeah, preventative is another huge one that even the reps for companies that provide that kind of stuff is a huge thing for them.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, of course.
I just have one comment. I think it will be really beneficial. So we had a stray cat show up like 8 years ago, jumped on our lap. Okay, we have to keep it. Even though we had a cat in the house, they got along, we kept it, we paid for all the vet bills. We're without cats. I go get a kitten someplace because I love cats, and now we have a dog. Well, a year ago, the rescue shelter I took it to said that it must have been 5 weeks old, and it was a kitten. And my husband, after a week, wanted to keep it, and I said, a vet bill for 3 animals? So if we had something like this, just to help with the spade, neutering, whatever, we would have definitely had another cat in our
Right.
house. So I think there's a lot of stray animals around,
Yeah.
and if there's something in the community that can help alleviate some of the vet bills that,
Well, it's a lot for
Animals.
somebody to take on a stray, even if they were going to try to rehome it themselves and take it to the clinic and get charged $400, $500, $600, or a dog, or any animal. You know, we struggle a lot with people that come in and they have to surrender their animal because they don't have enough funds for a specific medical issue, but they have funds to care for it every day, and it doesn't make them a bad owner because they can't pay for a specialized surgery, you know? And so if we can make those things, even vaccines, people don't understand how important they are, or heartworm prevention, if they can have access to that and not worry about it. I know a lot of cities provide like shot clinics at fire stations, but now that's really gone downhill too. So it's just another opportunity for us to be able to forward our mission, which also includes our community.
great job.
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought of one more question. So today you don't perform those services and you don't have a vet, but you are knowledgeable about what it takes, but you don't have any experience in that vet clinic type thing right now today.
As in this nonprofit one? No.
Yep, okay. And I guess I mean, thinking about what our decision is, if we're going to give any direction, I don't know what the rules are for what we can accept and not accept right now when it comes to that type of licensing. If it's the state that licenses it, then, and the city isn't involved, maybe that's better. I'm not really sure.
So I think, you know, maybe this will help answer part of that question. Do you have a time frame that you're thinking these phases are going to roll out? Because, you know, I could see sort of a phased approach to the permitting too, where
Sure.
initially it's a permit for the rescue, which we would actually probably have something to do with that, but maybe not. I don't know. It depends on how you describe your business.
Sure.
With something subsequently down the road that would be the veterinary wellness center.
Yeah, so I can understand how, I mean, it's the same for me as it is for you guys. You know, you can't approve something if it's not physically done yet, and I can't go and physically do it yet until I know that I have a space, because it does cost a lot of money. And so what I would say is that if we were approved for the conditional use permit, the next phase, which I've already started, is talking to our attorney to get her on the board and then make sure that we need to do any licensures through the state. I don't know if they require an actual license, but I do know that we need to register, and like they're going to have to come in and they'll give us a kennel license. I don't know if there's a separate license for veterinary care, but that's something that I can definitely call into to the board. I talk to them frequently. But I can definitely do that. And then once we get that going, I would love to start build out still this year. And then I would say phase 1 is probably going to run until spring. And then we would probably open it up to other rescues in the public in the springtime, which falls into when people go into the clinic anyway.
Okay, thank you.
I got one more question. What about, do you deal with these dogs like they have some big disaster down southern states, and they
Hurricanes.
bring in 100 chihuahuas or
Yeah.
something like that?
So we don't import from out of state. So we're not part of the rescues that have those large transports. The Humane Society does that for us. They bring in hundreds every week. But you know, the disaster situation right now is not about removing the animals from the area. It's about how to house them there while the disaster is figured out. And so we don't put ourselves in that. We focus on local animals. And so there wouldn't be a case where we would be having 50 to 100 animals coming in. And even if we did, they wouldn't be staying at this facility. It just doesn't make sense.
Thank you.
Yep.
I do have one other question. Are you strictly limiting your animals to dogs and cats, or do you take in other species?
So we have. It really is what's available to us and what the situation is. If the animal needs specific care, we have to have somebody who can handle that. We don't turn things away just because we only do dogs and cats. That's generally what we're asked to take. There are specialized groups that are available now, and they don't generally turn those other ones away, the exotics. But we have in the past, or volunteers like, you know, we got this animal and my kid doesn't want it anymore, so can you help me place this rabbit? I mean, we definitely do that. But as far as like the specialty stuff, I usually just stick in the dog and cat world.
Okay, thanks.
Barb, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I just want to say I really was impressed with your presentation.
Oh, thank you, Barbara.
And I really appreciate the job that all of the fosters and
Yeah.
shelters are doing. We've, over the years, had 5 rescue dogs. So thank you for
Thank
doing
you.
that. And I think your presentation, most of the questions were good questions, and I feel they've cleared up any,
Okay,
you know, thoughts that I would have.
good, I'm glad.
Robin, anything?
I've got nothing. I think your presentation was fabulous.
Thank you.
I read it, all of it before I even came here, and I thought, I don't know what to ask because everything seems to be there.
Okay, thank you.
I do have a couple of questions I have thought of. Would you explain to us the money flow?
Yep.
So you're a nonprofit?
Correct.
And this doesn't sound inexpensive. How does all that work?
No, it's not inexpensive. So, you know, donations are our main income, but we've been with the same bank for, you know, since 2004. And it's the funny story is they constantly call me about giving us loans, and I'm like, I don't need loans. I don't want a credit card. I don't want any of that. Like, we don't run on credit cards. We take in what we can afford and we pay it out. And so I did take them up, and I am in talks with the bank to do a small business loan. This facility we would be looking to lease for 5 years. And so they do have loans between 5 and 20 years that we would be using. But we would be doing a capital campaign to fundraise a lot of this. We do have a donor guide in process for the equipment, which we'll be talking to the manufacturers and the vendors to see if they have different options for us. A lot of equipment places let you lease them instead of having to buy them outright. But we do have a lot of supporters and company supporters that would like to sponsor stuff like that. Oh, sure. So over at the Blaine facility, we our monthly rent over there is just under $9,000 a month. And so this lease would be less. I will tell you, working in the veterinary field for so long and being manager of a lot of those facilities, even being low cost, the veterinary center is going to pay what needs to be paid for to run that building. I don't foresee any problems coming up with a monthly lease, with any other, you know, supplies, even at a low cost. Unfortunately, what you're paying for when you go in is the staff, and so we won't have that overhead.
Because your staff are volunteers?
Correct.
And your veterinarian is a volunteer?
Correct. Eventually, if there's enough need, we can hire somebody, but right now our plan is for them to just volunteer their time.
And so the money to pay the expenses for these rescue pets
Yep, so we
Or
do
from
charge
donations?
donations and the adoption fees. We charge adoption fees, they never cover what our animals cost.
What's an
but
option fee?
Adoption fee for us, dogs are $350 and cats are $150, $200. But since we do the specialized medical, the average animal that we have in our care is $1,200 to $2,000 for services. So we do have a long-standing list of donors that keep us funded. And since we do take, the fortunate or unfortunate side is people like to donate for the crazy situations, the really sad looking ones, the really injured ones. And so when you ask for donations for that and you say so-and-so needs to have a leg removed, they just donate. I mean, we took in a dog, I don't know if anyone was aware, Lynn, I think you're from the St. Paul area. And so there was a dog called Riptide. I don't know if you guys heard about Riptide, but he was found in St. Paul a couple years ago. And he was found in the woods by the mosquito company. And he had a zip tie around his muzzle, and he was tied by his leg to a tree. And so we posted for fundraising for him and raised $21,000 within 12 hours. So the community, we have good connections with the media. I mean, those are the stories that animal control, the mosquito company calls them while she's talking to the people on the mosquito. She's calling me and saying, can you please meet these people? We don't want them in our facility. This is just up your alley. So they're constantly calling me about animals like that. And so those are where we get our funds from, is the public. They follow us because of those stories.
So when you progress along your pathway and you're offering services to the public,
Correct.
that is below cost of bringing them to a vet somewhere, or is it the same, or?
So my costs
Yep,
will be
or-
lower because I don't have staff that I have to pay. I just pay for supplies and then whatever the equipment fee was.
And you are passing that on to the customer?
Correct.
Or to the pet owner?
Yep.
And I'm just thinking, last time I was there, I had to remortgage my house. And so that would be an addition or a value added to the local residents.
Correct. But remember that it would be like it's called a wellness center. So if your dog has an ear infection, you need to go to your normal vet. You know, we would just be doing preventive care like vaccines and your annual stuff that you get done.
And if somebody comes in with their pet to have their vaccines, who does that? You, or does it have to be the vet, or how does that work?
It depends on the vaccine. If it's the rabies, it needs to be done by a veterinarian. The veterinarian always has to be in the building for vaccines to be given, no matter what it is. But the person physically doing the vaccines can be a technician.
So you would advertise, come on down Saturday, we're giving vaccines. You line up the vet to make sure
Yep.
he or she is there,
Yep.
and people march in.
Yep.
Well, we used to have something in the old days, when we were a township, there was a pet vaccine thing, and people used to line up from.
Yeah, a lot of fire stations used to have shot clinics.
So, exactly. So what they had was, we had a local vet who would do pet clinic, and that's what he called it, pet clinic.
Yep.
And he would come in with his vet techs, and he would have 3 different stations,
Yep.
and people would line up, and they would sign up for, he would have a sheet of what they could sign up
Yep.
for. They would sign up, and then they would keep going. And I
Sure.
would say we had 100, 150 people, easy, every time we did pet
Yeah.
clinic.
Is that Dr. Fagerness?
Yes,
Yeah.
it was.
Yep, he does quite a few of them. He has been talking about retiring for 20 plus years, but I don't know if he actually is. We definitely, we know Dr. Fagerness as well. We've worked with a lot of people. He used to have one at Dover Kennel in Andover, a pet clinic. We used to work closely with them, so we definitely know Dr. Fagerness.
So I have one more question, and just talking about the finance part of it, and I don't know who can answer this, but what kind of taxes do they pay if they're a nonprofit?
We still have to pay sales tax, so anything that we sell would still be considered sales tax, and property tax.
Okay, but the sales tax would only be on supplies and your,
I think we still have to do it on services. I would have to talk to our accountant about that.
okay.
And then in terms of property taxes, so there's a distinction between properties that are owned by nonprofits and properties that are leased by nonprofits. And so there's different rates that apply there. If the property is outright owned by the nonprofit, they can apply for a property tax exemption, but that's different for landlords because they are accepting something of value on their property.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So for the time being, the taxes would stay coming to the city, county, and would be,
I believe it was 5 years you were leasing the building.
That's what, yep, is.
Yeah.
all right. Anything else, anyone?
No.
Well, thank you for coming in and giving
Thank you.
this. And remember, this is non-binding, so we're not going to vote. We're just going to think about it. And Elizabeth, should we go down our list in our packet on page 5 and 6? I mean, this is getting down to business a little bit, besides the presentation. So on the bottom of page 5,
Me, okay. Eleanor will go through it.
all right,
5 and 6.
Eleanor, would you go through it?
Sorry. So the basic concept.
Pull your microphone up, please.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
The basic concept review discussion items is the proposed use of the property consistent with the purpose of the highway commercial district? And this is kind of the first issue with this project, specifically in this location. Highway commercial district is probably the only district within that freeway area that does not include veterinary clinics as a conditional use. So in order to do this, CUP, we would have to consider a text amendment to that district and add that conditional use. When talking to Dean about this, we couldn't really find a reason why that veterinary clinic use was not added to the highway commercial area. And so that would be a part of this permit that we would have to address. Usually we would have the applicant apply for a text amendment and pay those appropriate fees and escrow amounts. However, with a nonprofit facility, we were considering doing it outside of that just because it is something that we seem to have missed. I can't seem to find a reason why it wasn't added in the first place. So we could do that just as a council outside and waive those fees for this nonprofit organization.
Do you know what the fees would be, roughly?
Off the top of my head, do you know text amendment fees? Yeah, so it would be a $100 fee and then associated fees. So if we had to have Megan or Dean write up reports for that text amendment, they would have to pay their fees.
Okay, so $120 or so.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
110, Mr. Mayor.
All right.
Mr.
Number
Mayor,
two.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask a question?
Certainly.
So I think I was part of that whole thing when we did that. I can tell you we didn't just forget, but that's okay. It's
Understandable.
beside the point. My question is really to Megan. So you have a business that's sort of a hybrid. So it's not just a veterinary wellness center. That's the future vision. The current vision is a rescue. So is a rescue or that sort of facility that also wasn't envisioned in here. So would we have to do 2 text amendments, or how would you end up doing that?
So again, it's very specific in terms of how that use is defined. And in terms of the day-to-day operations, as I understand it, and this is helpful to have the applicant here so we can work through this, is that initially, animals will not be accepted or surrendered at the facility, but that the facility will be used solely to provide medical services for animals already in your care. Is that
Yeah, that's correct.
so in that capacity, vet clinic best incorporates that use. And if so we have to also look at our definition of animal boarding and see whether a sort of a dual CUP would be appropriate as the use grows and as more intensive care is provided. And then in that regard, that would give, so Number one, I think vet clinic needs to be added as a zoning text amendment if you wish to support the use. Number two, I think we should look at whether a boarding facility with particular conditions or a new definition that's maybe even an amendment to the definition of a vet clinic, if it's not already incorporated to allow for those boarding uses, is part of the conversation as well.
And then my second question, and I should have asked this while we were going around the table, is do you envision using that? I mean, I got to believe that there's going to be some offices or something like that in that. And then would you ever use that in as some of your fundraising event, like an area for you to do fundraising events or anything like that? Because that would be another thing we would have to consider.
So with the facility that's there right now and what we're envisioning, there wouldn't be event space. We use a lot of like the ballrooms that are in the area. They just seem to work better for us. And so that we wouldn't have any events that we could envision using this space for.
Okay. Good, thanks.
Right. Yeah.
But there's office space in there too, right?
Yeah. Yep.
That's what I thought. Thanks.
109.3 square feet of office, I see.
Party time.
And a laundry room, which is bigger than the office.
There's a lot of towels that get washed in a place like that, isn't there? There'll be a place you can drop off your used towels that you don't want anymore.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to ask Dean a question.
Certainly.
Dean, don't we allow veterinary clinics in the freeway area, like in general business? And I think there's two other zones. This zone is less demanding than the other zones.
You are correct. We allow clinics and small boarding in the mixed use, I had to look this up, mixed use medium, mixed use high density, community commercial, general business, and the light industry. And I don't know if oversight is the right word, but to me, because I sat through that process, I'm not certain why it wasn't included either.
Exactly.
And so the issue at our staff meeting when this first came up is it doesn't matter how it's done. There has to be consideration for an amendment. And part of this meeting is this an issue, or is it like, no problem, let's encourage the applicant to move on?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's the whole issue regarding the zoning compatibility.
Because it's going to be so beneficial in so many ways that I can't understand why it wouldn't.
Second. No, I thought you were making a motion. Again, it's Eleanor's position here was to kind of flag the issues that have to be resolved if this is going to move forward. And then, of course, without you voting on these individually, you tend to agree or you don't agree. And so this is just something that the applicant has understood from the very first time we met. And how that application is paid for or whether the fee is waived is not relevant to any of this consideration. But to answer your question, it's in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of the 7 zoning districts in the
That's
freeway
why I was surprised when I read this. I thought, oh, that's got to be a mistake.
And, sort of again in this process, our consideration is whether or not the veterinary clinic use, aside from this particular user, is appropriate for the district. And then the secondary consideration is this particular user appropriate for this space, for this place? Does it have accommodation for outdoor dog runs and all of those things? So 2 separate questions.
All right, Eleanor, number 3.
Yes, moving on to the existing design of the property. If you scroll down to the page that has the current building on it. Yes, so I do not believe that this currently fits our new commercial design standards, the ones that we just reviewed. However, they are not the owners of this property during this permit. They are still suggesting some exterior changes to the design, and we can work with both them and the owner. This gives us an opportunity to work with the owners and this new leasing applicant about changing those designs of the building to better match our new ordinances. That goes in with the fourth, with the proposed design. There's definitely some other things to edit, but it does at least help. You know, I did not definitely look into what. Sorry,
And planning commissioners and members of council, you do have these new design standards, and a change in use via a CUP application grants you additional authority to require changes to the layout of the building and improvements to the, for the building to essentially come into compliance in many ways with some of your standards. Again, all very much dependent upon the facts that are presented at the time of the CUP hearing, the percentage of the building that is subject to the change. And so that's really the question for consideration is what level of compliance would need to be here. And Elizabeth can speak to as well the requirements in terms of connection to city services and those other considerations that would be a part of this application.
Yes, because the property is not currently connected to city services, and it is required to come into compliance. And then this application for a CUP would also provide us the authority to really require that connection to be made to city sewer services. Further on, the existing outdoor storage and screening components are consistent with the ordinance performance standards, and nothing is really being changed in that regard besides the fencing of the outdoor area for the animal relief area. And I know that further additions to the parking lot and parking lot improvements are also proposed through the CUP, whether that be through ARPA or through the current owners. That is another thing that needs to be addressed.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask another question? This is to Megan. Is the CUP issuance for a business like this similar to what we've discussed with the Brown Beagle development, where it's it's a leasing thing, so there'll be some sort of interim deal that, or some other kind of agreement that goes. You're shaking your head. Do you remember what I'm talking about? Because usually CUPs travel with the property, and when you're leasing, it can't really do that, right? So you're issuing the CUP to the, yes, but they don't own the land. So if they leave, what happens?
The CUP stays.
The CUP stays.
Subject to the conditions of approval.
Okay, so the CUP goes to Mr. McKenzie?
Correct.
All right. I was thinking about the Brown Beagle model where it was going to the leasee.
Well, and so
not a real dog, not a Brown Beagle. This is the name of the business.
And in terms of the Brown Beagle model, we can, I guess, Elizabeth might be better suited to speak to sort of the testimony I don't think I was there for that hearing, but more broadly speaking, our attempt in that area is to create the maximum amount of flexibility for users. Mm-hmm. And so for an applicant to come in, if they have a multi-facility site and say, these are the uses that we believe are market appropriate mm-hmm. for the buildings, mm-hmm. these are the uses that are, that we think will be filled up, and so that they can provide that service for their tenants. But broadly, those uses will continue to run with the property even as the tenants come and go. We're just suggesting that in that multi-phased process, that the landlord take an active role in setting expectations for their tenants and for the city, frankly, mm-hmm. and getting those approved in one fell swoop right. At the time of construction.
And I think what I'm remembering was there was something with the developer's agreement that was holding the owner of the property responsible for the conditions. And that's why I was asking if there was going to be something similar. There's no developer's agreement in this situation, so I just didn't know like who gets held responsible. for the conditions.
And in this one, there's not multiple buildings, so it's just the landlord. There's just the one landlord.
Got it, thank you.
I'm sorry, there's two landlords.
I got it, well, then I'm okay with it. Can he come up to the mic so we can hear? Nuh-uh.
I can, but I don't think they can.
Bad acoustics in this room.
Here I am again. So we already talked about hooking up water and sewer. So I've got that set, but I'd like to know why that sheetrock guy doesn't have to hook up, or why the guy that has the big monster trucks doesn't have to hook up. You tell me I have to hook up because I'm changing occupancy. I'm gonna hook up because it's a good idea. It increases the value of the building. The water quality is a lot better. The water there is not great. But to tell me I have to do that to rent to somebody else when nobody else has to do it seems kind of discriminatory to me.
There's no discrimination. Everyone must hook up. And now we have a compliance officer that's going to start working on that because we have given everyone time, and then it was COVID, and then, there were some, mitigating circumstances. But there's mandatory hookup, and it's on every property.
Well,
So
we're going to do that.
There isn't any difference on how anyone's been treated. I am, as I've told to a couple of council members, I'm unaware of the monster truck business, but we'll certainly get aware of the monster truck business because this has been repeated a couple of times. Unaware that there's one of those in that area, so we'll make sure that Sean.
So now the next question is the building itself. I just paid 12 grand to paint that building. I had it all tuck pointed and painted. So I don't know what this rendition is here, if you got halfway brick and all that on there, but that's fairly expensive. So I'm not gonna basically put brick on the front of the building when it already is block.
I was just going to say, this is a masonry building. Well, everyone might not know this, but this is a block building, so it is a masonry building. And while it might not meet all the design criteria, it does have legal nonconforming use classification. So understand the building was built according to the code at the time. It's being reused, and there are some things that we will bring up to code, like the parking and the landscaping and a few other things that they show in their pictures. But again, it's a block building that meets our requirements, and they have agreed to take the exercise equipment off the roof.
Well, see, I was gonna make a promise to Mr. Preiner here. We're not gonna put any inflatable dogs or cats up there. There's not gonna be any animals on the roof. But, so we're gonna hook up to the water and sewer. That's actually got nothing to do with this, because I already budgeted for it. $850 million. And then we're having the lot paved, but the length of the building plus the left side, not into the side that's fenced. So that's another 55,000. So hooking up to the water and sewer total is like 75 grand. So I don't know what you get for rent, but that doesn't cover it, trust me. But anyway, so that's what we're gonna do. The building, and there's 3 bricks on the front of the building that aren't painted. I backed a truck into it. 31 years I've been doing this, I backed a truck into the building. $7,000 later, I have to paint the bricks. But anyway, the building will look like it does, and if they want to put different colors on it, they're more than welcome. I always tell my renters, if you don't like the color, or you want to put a stripe on it, you want to do something like that, make it more show up. I mean, what do you think of bright yellow and blue dots? We want to draw attention to this place. So anyway, that's all I brought my boss with me. I said, you need to see how this works, because I come home, and then she says, hey, wait a minute. So she came with to see what's going on.
Tim, question about the trees out front.
What about that? They have nothing to do with that.
Well, they have
Look over
trees.
your right shoulder.
You have trees
Here,
planted.
4 trees.
People can't see them because the freeway. You get, how much is the fine?
No trees. No way. You know what? If you look out there at the fence from the state, this has been an ongoing battle for me for 30 years. The FXR building, I have that. They're always complaining that nobody can see it. because it grows up there. Now, if you guys remember, there's a couple old timers here. They put the fences up for a specific reason. That was to keep wildlife off the freeway. And the idea back then was to clear it from the fence to the freeway so you would have a reaction time. So if a deer jumped over and you're driving up on a weekend and everybody's speeding, you see that deer and everybody can stop. Now, they don't mow that down anymore, okay? I used to go over to the state garage and I'd give them a couple cases of beer and they would mow it down. That's true, because they were supposed to anyhow. But they don't anymore. So I actually went to the DOT and I talked to them. Now to do it, they give you a permit. It doesn't cost anything. And they give you a permit, but you have to wear a yellow vest and everything. You cannot unload any equipment on the freeway. And you have to have the permit displayed with one person. And you have to mow it down, in a day or two. Okay? And when we did it the last time, the Highway Patrol stopped 5 times to see if we were doing it. And the fine, by the way, is $50,000 if you don't get a permit. So there's already trees on that side. No, I didn't see those trees. And I don't want them there either. But anyway, maybe some low hedges or something. Nice, what are those ferns called? You know what they are. Yews?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, whatever. But I can just promise you there's not going to be, and that's a brand new roof, by the way. So that place will be pretty nice. I'm really excited about this because I'm a big rescue guy. I really am. And so is my wife. So we're pretty pumped. I feel kind of guilty charging them rent. That's my problem. That's my real problem.
You work on it.
And we're arguing about it all the time. So. Am I done here? Here's the mic.
Yep. Thanks.
Thank you.
So Elizabeth, what's the next step? So this is non-binding. The consensus seems to be fairly positive.
So, you have an applicant before you, and as she's explained to you, they're ready to take the next steps, but they don't want to spend a lot of money on the next steps if they're not going to have success through the Planning Commission and Council. And so really they're here before you tonight to say, okay, is the next step applying for a conditional use permit? And they realize it's non-binding, but is there support on an individual basis for this business because they have to do a text amendment? If they can't get the text amendment, they won't, the CUP wasn't exist. So really the biggest question is, do you feel it's appropriate to amend the code? Because that is the biggest policy question that's before you. And if you're not willing to amend the code, they need to know, because they're not going to spend any more money on this site. They're going to move to another site that they are able to get their permit in front of. So really, as a result of tonight, they really want some feedback from all of you, because I think from talking to them, they would like to apply tomorrow and get the ball rolling. So this is really kind of the first step in one of many.
Well, then I'll pose the question and we can go around and thumbs up or thumbs down. Are you willing to entertain a text amendment that would allow this business use in that district? I'll start with Sue.
Yes. I guess I don't see any showstoppers. I haven't seen anything that is really a red flag. So I guess I would be willing to look at that.
And Ron?
Pretty hard to say no to that.
Yeah.
The mayor told me to put pictures in there.
Yeah. You didn't put one bear in its teeth.
Absolutely.
I'm kind of in the same boat as Sue. I mean, I don't have any red flags, and I liked what I heard, but I still need more information before I would say yes or no for sure.
Judy?
I would be inclined to be in favor of it.
Barb.
Definitely for me.
Robin?
Me as well. I think it's a great idea.
And I will be in favor of it. And again, I'll echo Janet with her.
Bethany's online.
Oh,
Bethany, we didn't.
Bethany's
oh,
online.
sorry. Bethany, what do you think?
Can you hear me?
Now we
Can
do.
you hear me? I don't know how this works. I think it's great. But,
So-
how can you not?
You saw the pictures, right?
Yes, and my dog is watching. He's actually in the meeting with me, so he says yes too.
All right.
Yeah, right.
And I'll go along with Janet. I'm certainly not against it. And I would welcome it once we have a little bit more information. So, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you. Ann,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
I just want to make an unrelated to what's going on here is because, as you know, I've been here on both sides of issues over the last many years, being a resident here for 30 years, but I'm going to take and do a pat on the back, and don't lose Ellie. She has been professional, she has been fair, she's been honest, she hasn't promised anything, and she's been the best assistant to Elizabeth that I've seen in all the years I've been here, so don't let her get away. And she didn't even pay me to say that.
Well, that's nice to hear. Congratulations, Eleanor. So the next step is
CUP application.
Yep, submitting applications for both the text amendment and for the conditional use permit.
And do you have any questions of us?
No, I just appreciate everybody. I had to do the same thing in Blaine when we went to do it, and it was, they are in favor because it's animals and they don't want to be against it, but they definitely were not as involved as you guys, and so I appreciate all the questions. I knew that there would be a few, and you can kind of be nerve-wracking when you don't do this a lot, but I do appreciate that you guys care about this issue as well as, you know, your residents and how they can better serve their animals. So it helps when everybody kind of is going in the same direction, even though there are some hard questions that have to be asked. So I appreciate it, and I appreciate all your feedback that you guys have been giving.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.
All right, perfect.
See you next time.
So now we'll quickly move on to number 7, which is the council and the commission discussing our residential zone business ordinance, and that's pages 12 through 18, and the enclosure B, the great big map. So Megan, I think you're going to lead us through this, correct?
I sure will. If
right.
we can move on to our first slide, just a little bit of level setting here. So your existing ordinance has 2 categories for people who run commercial businesses out of their home. You have a home occupation use, which is a permitted use. It's a non-intense, it has restrictions in terms of the percentage of the home used and a 300 square foot requirement within your accessory buildings. Your residential zone business is an interim use within your rural residential district. It's expanded, it allows further square footage use of accessory buildings as compared to your home occupation definition, and generally it's a more intense use. So the last time we spoke about this was our August 7th joint meeting, and we talked really about, I think, 3 overarching conversations. Number 1, the impact of commercial uses on rural residential properties. Number 2, the desire to incentivize and push commercial uses into our well-established commercial districts that have been recently subject to code amendments and really active planning on the part of the city. And then 3rd, balancing the property rights of our existing homeowners and ensuring that where we have large lots, there is really a desire to ensure that people can utilize their properties broadly to accommodate the things that they want to do, while also, again, having that respect for surrounding neighbors. One of the things that that this body, the Planning Commission and the City Council, asked of staff was to figure out what businesses we have in the City of Columbus and where they're located. And staff has undertaken a broad review to answer that question, and that's the very large map that you have at your seats. I'm gonna open mine up, and so staff is going to talk about the process they utilized to compile this list. But what I'd like to share is you can see the breadth of businesses that are operating within your rural residential district right now. So all of that yellow space and all of those red dots are existing businesses. And really the question for you all as we look into this ordinance is how can we preserve these uses in many ways because they do not produce nuisance conditions. They do not appear as commercial, but rather integrated into the home. And staff will discuss the proposed revisions to the ordinance that we think accommodates that. And then how do we prevent further expansion of more intense uses? And again, pushing those uses into your CI light district, into your CI district, and in your freeway districts that allow for broad commercial use. But to kick off sort of our standards of how we exist and function today, I will turn it over to Ellie.
All right, so I did want to go over this map that you have in front of you and have full transparency of how this data was collected and how it was put into the way that you see it now, as well as what the information this map does contain and what it is missing, because it is not 100% comprehensive of every single business represented in our city. So firstly, how we compiled this data is we used the Secretary of State list of registered businesses. They send you a list of every business in Minnesota, which is pretty long. And the problem with using that with our specific city is a lot of times people don't write down Columbus as the city that the address is in. They say Forest Lake or Wyoming or all of these other cities that are not Columbus. So you can't filter it just by that. So we filtered it down to our 4 zip codes, filtered it down to address numbers. So from north to south in this specific zip code, you go from 1100 up to like 1900 are the address numbers. So we filter it down, give it a little breathing room, and then we print it out and we went through every single address to mark down which ones are actually contained within our city. So the information that this map does contain are businesses that are registered with the Secretary of State at an address in Columbus. So the second part of this ordeal was cross-referencing that with our city's existing permits, our CUPs and our IUPs, marking down which of these addresses had a CUP or an IUP associated with the business there, which ones are permitted. And so those are the color-coded pieces of your map. So the red are ones that do not have a permit at all. They're unpermitted with our city. The blue have CUPs, and the green have residential zone business IUPs. Finally, we overlaid this with our zoning districts so you can have general information about what businesses are where. So the things that are missing from this map are businesses not registered with the Secretary of State, those home occupations. Or not local. Yes, that's the next part. Those smaller businesses that maybe just never registered. They sell things on Etsy from their home, they didn't register. And then businesses that are conducted in Columbus that are not registered in Columbus. So places like, I know Camping World was not registered in Columbus because they're not registered in Minnesota. But I know that they exist because we have a permit for it. I've talked to them. So they are on this list because I added them. Same thing with Love's Travel Center. So there are those interstate businesses, those bigger ones that we know exist, but they're not included on this map because they're not registered in Columbus. They're registered elsewhere. And some of these smaller businesses, some of those home occupations, are also registered outside of their home, like a P.O. box in another town, maybe a office that they have in a different town, and then they work from home a lot of the time. So they aren't registered at their home, they're registered in that office in Forest Lake. So those are the things that are missing from the maps and the things that are represented on the maps. Looking through some of the information, some of those red dots in the rural residential, I haven't done a full comprehensive review of all of those businesses. However, a lot of them do look like home occupations. They're home offices, they're small businesses. Some of them have nonprofits registered at their location. Very few of them seem to be, well, that's a bit generic, but there are definitely a handful of them that do not fit within our home occupation ordinance as it exists today. However, I did want to clarify, since a lot of red dots on the map look very scary, but a lot of them are home occupations. And then I'll pass it back on to Megan.
Well, and when we're talking about home occupation, I think there's two things for you to think about. Number one, how is it practically used? So one of the businesses that's on here is the Starlight Ice Dance LLC, and so when I saw this listed, so I'm a former figure skater. I grew up as a figure skater before girls were regularly playing hockey, and I recognized the Starlight Ice Dance Company. And of course, the Starlight Ice Dance Company practices at Eden Prairie, they practice at Braemar and Edina, and they practice at Parade Ice Garden. And they are featured in one of Minnesota's best movies, The Mighty Ducks. And so when we think about what a home occupation is, I want you to keep in mind, how is it used? Why does how is Starlight Ice Dancing using this facility? They're not having ice dancing meetings at their home. It's simply registered as a business to that particular address. So how is it used, and then how is it held out? What is the practical impact of it? The practical impact is not that we have ice dancers showing up to pay their dues at a home in Columbus, but is particularly where they receive their mail. So in both of those, and I think what you'll find in further dive and review into these materials is we have a lot of businesses that are just like the Starlight Ice Dance Company in Columbus, that the home is utilized as that place, but is not the operation center for what they actually do. Same thing is true with a number of, I think, of the nonprofits and the churches that are registered to homes. There are not church services that are being, all those are protected uses, so aside from that, but church services are not being held at these particular homes. Rather, it's the mechanism for mailing and for registration with the Secretary of State's office. So with that in mind, I'd like to move on to the staff proposal. So what we brought before you is a three-phased approach. And I'd like to go through the three phases before we move on to specific conversation around the proposed code revisions. So the phase one is really undertaken in light of the work that staff has done to prepare this map and for us to have a better understanding of what is actually operational within the rural residential district. So we see 3 or 4 goals of revising our home occupation definition. They are to ensure that existing uses are consistent with residential use and otherwise appropriate for the rural residential district. That's where you see more restrictions incorporated into that home occupation definition. We also have the goal to preserve property owners' rights to put their homes to reasonable use. It's where you see a shift from a square footage requirement to a percentage requirement. So looking at if a lot is larger, it's going to have more flexibility already built into the zoning ordinance. If a lot is smaller, there's going to be more restrictions in terms of what's compliant with the setbacks, and we would recommend triggering our home occupation standards to follow those mechanisms. Use standards, again, that are varying based on the size of the property, and then limiting broadly all exterior storage for commercial purposes. Again, a restriction that is consistent with keeping the rural residential. So those revisions to the home occupation definitions, we believe, meet the policy goals of, again, retaining that residential character while also consuming many of these red dots on the map. So retaining our status quo for those businesses that have not shown to be a nuisance to their neighbors or been otherwise problematic in terms of how the property is used. Our second phase is to broadly sunset the residential zone business IUP. And there are a number of ways in which we can do that. But what we've determined is that as businesses have pushed out into Columbus, and as cities closer to our core cities have increased the restrictions within their zoning ordinances, we see more and more intense businesses attempting to utilize our large residential lots as a mechanism to have a cost-effective business operation, commercial operation. But that trend tends to change the character of the district. And so with that in mind, we're recommending what we believe is a reasonable approach to permitted home occupations and then future restriction, no further IUPs for residential zone businesses, and pushing, again, those uses to our commercial districts. The goals of this is, again, to limit that more intense use, and secondly, to transition existing IUP holders so that those IUPs have a final end date where the use would no longer be permitted, but having a reasonable end date. And there's two options that staff has proposed that we can talk about in detail, but generally it would be for the IUP to terminate and the ability to use this more intense commercial use consistent with the conditions and requirements of the IUP upon sale of the property, or potentially to include it as a long-term permitted use for those 6 properties that have existing IUPs within the city. And then lastly, I think it's excellent that we had the conversation that we had today about zoning text amendments and the appropriateness of a vet clinic potentially within another district within the city, because our third phase is really recommending a use-specific approach for more intense uses within your commercial district. Because one of the things that I think has become difficult as we looked at varying mechanisms to create different levels of home occupations is to be able to put together a one-size-fits-all approach that would prohibit the types of businesses that you don't want to see in the rural residential, but allow the types of businesses that you do want to see, or to allow more flexibility for very large lots, very large properties. And so what our third phase of recommendation is to really create an off-ramp for you for uses that are appropriate within the rural residential district. And a couple of those that are regularly utilized in surrounding and similar cities are commercial stables. That might be appropriate use to be adopted through an IUP. Recreational facilities could be adopted through an IUP. Farm wineries. I'll say something that I don't think would have support among these bodies, but wedding venues are another commonly adopted, IUP condition in a very large lot district. So the city of Chaska just adopted that and has this very, very beautiful wedding venue with horses and a beer garden and many things, and they see it as an economic generator. But to try to fit that into like a home occupation standard, or to allow, let's say that would be a policy consideration the council would be interested in, to try to make that into a residential zone business IUP or a more intense residential zone business IUP, then potentially lets in much broader uses that would have similar traffic patterns as a wedding venue and things like that, that would make it more difficult for you to really narrowly think about what's appropriate for the district. And so that's why we recommend this use-specific approach. So I can move to our next slide to talk about the proposed revisions to the home occupation standard, but I'm also happy to pause for questions. Hearing none at this time, I will continue. So I have summarized on your packet, within your packet within our memo, we have the actual technical revisions to the home occupation standard. However, I've just summarized them here on our screen for us to walk through. So we are permitting a full or part-time commercial business. We are allowing a use of accessory structure, no more than 30% of the accessory structure. No employees, only family residing on the property. And I say only family residing on the property because that is what the code says today. And family in the city of Columbus is very narrowly defined. one of the questions that we thought about in making the revisions to the ordinance is whether or not having a language that says only residents of the property could operate this commercial business. Well, what if you have farmhands? Now, and again, that's in an agricultural setting. I'll back up. What if you have people who work for an automotive business that live in a guest home on the property or rent a bedroom? Your definition of family does not permit that type of, by including your definition of family within this section, you would not be allowing people to live on the property, rent a room and then work an auto body shop out of the garage. So that use of the word family is an important component here. No exterior storage. Limited parking, again, is very similar to the ordinance that you have today. Right now, the ordinance does permit 4 parking spaces within a residential lot for a home occupation. We've included hours of operation, and this is where, so when we were drafting this, we went back to the work that Jessica had done to look at similar ordinances that have been deployed around the Twin Cities. And many cities utilize an hours of operation standard, and so we incorporated it into this definition. But it really then poses the question for you all about this idea of use, okay? And this is why I bring up the Starlight Ice Dance Company, because the people who are operating the Starlight Dance Company may take my application to be a member of the company at midnight. Is that a violation of our hours of operation standards? And so I think it's important when we're talking about what a home occupation is to really think about it in a couple of different buckets. Number one, is it sort of a retail use? Is it something where someone's putting together fishing lures and people are coming to pick them up at their home? That would be an approved, again, at the right scale, an approved and reasonable home occupation, a permitted use. But you might want to be able to restrict those hours of operation. The same thing could be true with professional uses. So if you have a therapist providing services, or if you have automobile services, again, in that more commercial context, or if you have a hair salon that's operating, a single stylist who's doing, cuts, colors, and blow dries, do you want those cars coming and going after 10 p.m.? Probably not. And so when we think about, but we also wouldn't want to say, well, if you're a remote worker, you cannot work after 10 p.m. Those are the rules of the city of Columbus. And so as you consider these revisions, that's one of the things that I would keep in mind. It may need some tweaking if you wanted to continue to try to restrict a retail use or things of that nature. That language could use some refinement. We have created flexibility for use and parking of commercial vehicles. So one of the policy issues that the council has encountered in reviewing, in particular, IUPs for residential zone business is if you have a long haul trucker who parks their commercial truck on a property. And is that appropriate? And I think the general consensus has been, yes, that's appropriate, as long as it's screened from the surrounding property owners. To park one's truck is acceptable. And so accordingly, we incorporated that into the home occupation definition with sufficient screening. And then we also included a provision that's often found actually outside of the state of Minnesota, but I think it's a useful one. So no additions for the limited purpose of the business that are not usual and customary to residential properties. And the example that was raised in a Pennsylvania case in particular was a super lift. So there was an accessory building and an auto mechanic had installed a triple lift that allowed for 3 cars to be rotated and stored within the property. Not typical and customary to a residential property. So a more intent, and other things that might fall within that is there's a distinction between someone who is welding pieces of material for jewelry creation or for building small, a subset of tools. Or to develop fishing lures. There's something very different for commercial welding, right? And so we want to keep the types of materials that are utilized within the home occupation consistent, again, with that less intense use. And so those are our proposed revisions, and are happy to answer questions and take follow-up on that.
I have a whole bunch of questions.
Great.
I can start. So I really like this expanded use of the home occupation. So, and my questions are, so if you,
mic up a
is this better? Okay, on page 4, do we want to say that the activity has to be conducted entirely within a dwelling or the accessory building? I think we do, so that would be one suggestion. You mentioned the family definition, so I kind of didn't follow you. What's the definition of a family member?
So I'm going to ask Elizabeth to pull it up in the code, and I actually have it in my PowerPoint in the notes section. If you could just slide it up for me. It is no more than, I think, than 4 unrelated persons by blood or adoption. It's very restrictive, and so.
So they don't have to live there. They just have to be.
They have to
related?
reside on the property
and be related.
Be a family member.
And be related.
Yes.
Okay. So then now I'm on page 16. My question is where it says the home occupation shall meet all applicable fire and building codes, residential or commercial codes, because they're different. And that's been a question we have not been able to kind of address.
Well, and so how this provision is typically interpreted, and it would be in the interpretation that we would encourage for staff, is that if there is a machining equipment that requires a higher standard, that those commercial standards be adopted. So what the fire and building official requires is what those improvements would need to be made to the overall building. And that would be, if the electrical needed to be upgraded to accommodate a machining use that still didn't have noise, glare, nuisance conditions, all of those things, that they would need to come into compliance with that, so as to avoid fire and all of those things.
I think the question that I kind of thought about was pole buildings, because there's pole buildings that are built to residential standards and pole buildings that are built to commercial standards, and they're very different. They have different wind load and snow load capacities and things like that. And I actually I'm not advocating for one or the other, but I think we should be clear which we want. So if we're letting them run a business out of their pole barn, do we want to make sure that if there's people in there working, it's not going to collapse if we have a big heavy snowstorm or if we have a straight line winds or something like that. So I'm throwing that out there. I don't know what the answer is, but I think we should just be clear if we're looking for residential or commercial codes.
And in drafting this, I was thinking again, sort of going back to what are the technical specifications that are required because of the business, and thinking more along the lines of drainage. If you have an automobile shop operating in a garage, that there's appropriate drainage and collection of oil, materials, and all of that. Also thinking about the sort of electrical load upgrades that might be required to accommodate more intense machining uses. But I did not consider the overall sort of building standards. And I think that I think it makes sense because one of the considerations for you all is that we're talking about a use of 30% of this accessory building. So when we talk about accessory versus primary uses, we often think of a primary use as being at least 51% of the overall building. And so at least 51% of this overall building would be for traditional residential purposes. That would lean towards accepting residential standards, except for, and maybe the nuances, residential standards except for any upgrades that need to be done to the building to accommodate what is actually happening on the site, whether it's collection of oil or, we just had our house redone for electrical purposes, so it's really in my brain that there's all sorts of upgrades that are possible from 1929.
A lot has happened since then. Okay, well, I'm just throwing that out there. I mean, like, I had a friend who had a cabinetry business that he had in Minnetonka for years that he operated out of his garage. He's now in a commercial area. But I remember him telling me how when he'd come home after working his day job and he'd go out there and he'd fire up his saws and all that kind of stuff, but all the lights in the neighborhood would dim because he was drawing so much power. So, I mean, I don't know if that was specific to his neighborhood, but I mean, he obviously had electrical wiring that was appropriate but it sucked more than what the neighborhood could handle. So I'm just
interesting.
It's a question to ponder. So then the next thing I would just comment on is I think 4 stalls are too much for residential. I mean, it just seems like if you're a hairdresser or a therapist or something, I mean, how often are you going to have 4 people there at the same time? I get that if you have family members, you might, but I mean, if they live there, that's not what this is talking about. This is more, so it seems like 4 is too much. I mean, it seems like 2 might be reasonable, but that's just a suggestion. With the mechanics, I think there's also, and correct me if I'm wrong, Elizabeth, I remember this coming up with one of our IUP applicants who repaired, isn't there like a county license that they have to get, like for hazardous waste or something like that? So I don't know if we want to add something in here that they have to meet all county and state licensing or permitting requirements. Disposal, yeah. On the hours of operation, I was trying to think about this in the context of, like where I live, where the houses are pretty close to one another, even though we are all on 5-acre lots. So I didn't know if you wanted to consider a Monday through Friday, 10 p.m. to 7, and maybe something like 10 p.m. to 9 or something on a weekend. Again, if they're not going to have a lot of traffic or noise or anything like that, it doesn't matter. But I don't know. It seems people are pretty protective of their weekend sleep-in days. So just thought about that. I also was wondering, how do we address agricultural businesses as it relates to this? Because I noticed in the part on the bottom where you talked about horse trainers, and I was thinking, back in the day when I had a horse, that there was some activity at the state legislature that was trying to move horse-related businesses, whether it was boarding stables or training facilities, out of that agricultural, and I think it failed, but that was a lot of years ago, so I don't know if that's still considered an ag business or not, but it seems to me that there's different rules that apply to ag businesses, and I don't know if we need to call that out, because there's a lot of confusion about that also, I think, as people drive around and go, hey, how come that person doesn't have to do whatever?
So Megan, the right to farm was redone at the legislature, I want to say 3, 4, 5 years ago, and now the years are all melding together. But there are a lot of rights to farming, and that trump us. So,
absolutely.
So I think I think you have to put that in a different bucket.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things is that we do have that right to farm and our agricultural uses preserved within the broader ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would not consider those home occupations.
Okay.
They would be outside of the realm of home occupations entirely.
Okay. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention was that when you include remote workers, I really don't, I consider that not a home, I mean, that's just somebody working for another business somewhere else out of their home, which has nothing to do with what we're doing. So I would make it really clear that remote working from home is not what this is about. Mm-hmm. This has nothing to do with that.
Well, and one of the interesting things I think that we've observed across cities is that remote working has done two things. Number one, it has made people be home more during the day, which has led to more observation of what else is happening in the neighborhood during the day. So it very much has a shift in a relationship in terms of when we think about the potential nuisance complaints that the city receives, because people are seeing so much more. They're seeing what's actually going on rather than during 9 to 6 rather than just when they get home from work. But I think that's exactly right. And that's the sort of desired example, and also the sort of comfort that I would like to share as part of this presentation, is that we are not considering home occupations those people who are working remotely. We are considering home occupations as where it is your core, it is your corporate center, is your home, and you are running your business out of your home as a corporate center.
Right.
The Starlight Ice Dance team is not running their, they are not doing all of the work of their corporate facility out of that home. They're doing it at the Parade Ice Rink, and they're doing things. And that's why I think going back to those analyses of use, how is the property actually being used and how is it benefiting the commercial business is an essential sort of component of really understanding this definition.
Yep. And then I think just my last comment has to do with the over-the-road truck driving. Boy, we had a lot of discussion about this with an IUP application, and it kind of requires further definition because there's a lot of different variations of this, as well as, you know, bringing the truck home. Does that mean that they have their trailers that they can hook up to? Does that mean, I mean, there's a lot of nuances with that, and whether or not they're driving on roads that can handle the weight. Like if they're on residential roads, can those residential roads handle the weight? Are they leaving? In one case, this fellow left on a Monday and came back on a Friday and was out of state the whole rest of the time. So that's really different than someone who might be making multiple trips back and forth with a big old semi from their home. So I don't know how to flesh that out, but I think we do need to flesh it out. That's all.
Well, and so one mechanism that we can use to flesh that out is to have, to use a defined term. So we can talk, so we broadly say commercial vehicles as drafted now, but we could talk about specifically what that is, and we can include trailers. We can change the words commercial vehicles, which is broadly drafted, intended to capture many things, and we can have a more nuanced definition that says, you know, these things are, we wouldn't call them commercial vehicles, we'd call them some fancy definition name.
You know, I think that the definition is key here, because it's not just tractor trailers that people bring home. You know what I mean? If you work for Midco, you might bring the Midco truck home. And it's not, well, it's not your vehicle, it is your vehicle, but it's your work vehicle, and they let you take it home. And so it sits in the driveway. Others might be a contractor, and they took the trailer home because it has the skid loader on the back of it, and it's now going to be parked in the driveway because tomorrow they have to use the skid loader, you know what I mean, at the next job. So it's not just the tractor trailer. It's people like to bring home whatever it is they're going to use the next day, the next week, or they own it, they own the business someplace else, or they're going to bring home whatever it is that they're bringing home because they like it. They want to put it in their garage. They want to tinker with it. I don't know what they want to do with it, but all I know is that they want to bring it home. And they're not working on their business isn't home, but they want to bring it home. And they don't want to put it in their accessory building. They would like to park it in their driveway. And I think this is what is irksome to people, because then the perception is the home business is at home when it's really not. I don't know how you classify all that, but all of that is encompassing. And I think people in this room all know and have neighbors that way.
Oh, yeah.
Well, sort of along those lines, if we put aside those things that are personal, vehicles, personal, skid loaders, those items, and then you think about those things that are commercial. So I'm going to say, long-haul truck, a commercial trailer, the Midco truck. What does the council, and what is the opinion of the council and the planning commission on where that line lies? And is there a clear stopping point where, and maybe we need Jim on this too, but is there a clear stopping point for our roadways that they just simply cannot accept a vehicle within our residential district above a certain weight? And then we could, more broadly define something. It's not my area of expertise, so truck weight limits. But I know that we've had a lot of conversations about truck weight limits, and that can be, again, a very difficult area to enforce. So we would want to be very specific about what those expectations are. And I think if we can talk about it as a class of vehicle, that would be a way to address that issue.
I don't know if you can, I mean, there are road standards that we have, and Jim could probably rattle them off for various different roads. And I think if we looked at the number of trips typically per day, you might make some decisions based on that. Like I said, we allow trucks that are over the weight limit to make deliveries into residential areas. So if you're figuring they might come once every day or once every few days. So if somebody was taking their big old truck and driving down the road to go somewhere else and they come back at the end of the day, that's probably not a problem. But if they're making multiple deliveries and they're going up and down 3 or 4 times a day, maybe that is more of a problem. And so, I think you might be able to frame it from the perspective of whatever road they live on and what the weight limits are of that road, and then the number of trips that they make. Bearing in mind that there's commercial vehicles that can drive on the roads and exceed the limits as long as they're making a delivery. So going back to the usual residential traffic, if they were fit that definition, that would be fine, but if they greatly exceeded it, that might not be so good.
Well, and one of the things to consider is that as we've restricted the uses here, who are the practical trucks that we're concerned about? So a person who is picking up a load and bringing it out with a very heavy truck on a repeated basis would be the type of truck we are concerned about. But based on the other restrictions, based on our 30% restriction and based on our restriction of no exterior storage, so no dirt piles, no things like that.
It's any of your landscape, your snow plowers, any of those will have, I won't say heavy trucks, but multiple trips, multiple ins and outs, lots of equipment depending on what season it is. So I do think, though, I think you have to remove the over the truck driver, because they're limited, right? They have so many hours they can drive and they got to get home. And you can't mess around. Your either destination is home. So I think that one is, and that's not their business. They're going home. So I almost think you have to carve that out somewhere, because I've gotten this question a lot. Can I bring my rig home? And to me, it's like their car. And they're going out the next day. They're not doing business at their home. They're going home to sleep. So I kind of carved that out a little bit now. I realized on Notre Dame that was different. He happens to have a business. It's in California. So that was a little bit different, where he had, 4 different kinds of trailers and all those things. That truly was a business. But for the person who works for someone else, I think that's a little bit different.
But I think, Elizabeth, that example, what that example really taught me is how different the applicant will define their business from the way we define it, because he defined it as a trucking business. And it was almost more like dispatch. He dispatched from his home and then he left and he went out of state for 5 days and then he came back. And, I think, when I heard you speak earlier, Allie, when you were talking about the majority of these businesses are home occupations, like we don't have a clue what they are. That we know their name, we don't know what they do. And I don't know how we're going to find that out or what the plan is to find that out, but I think that you have to be really careful, because we have our box that we view things through, and I have learned that it is very different than what the public views it through. And that's usually where we run into problems.
This is Barb. With an over-the-road trucker, for years, truckers have not been able to bring their vehicles home. My dad was an over-the-road trucker.
Can you pull it up? I can't hear you.
My father was an over-the-road trucker, and he's, would be 100 years old now. When we lived in Roseville, he could not bring his truck home. A lot of cities have those kinds of restrictions, so I don't think it's unreasonable. We do have some larger properties where if they had an accessory building, they could pull it in there so the neighbor didn't have to look at it. Even if it's a 5-acre lot, if you look across, and other towns have restrictions against RV parks. That's why we have all these storage areas. So I don't think it's that unreasonable to require even somebody that has a truck that they screen it somehow or put it in an accessory building. And if they have more than one, it definitely doesn't belong in a residential area.
So my brother is he has his own trucking company, and he has one truck. And he goes home at night in his truck, but he also has put up fencing around the back and the side, so he pulls up next to the garage. So, and not that he has neighbors that would see it, but he has it, screened. So I don't think if they're going home in their truck to go home and then they go the next day in one vehicle, that's a lot different than having people come and get multiple.
Yeah, and where I was going with is having weight restrictions. That's the trouble with weight restrictions, because you have these exceptions, which I don't think that's where you're going. I don't think you're trying to regulate those people from going home.
No.
So that's where what trying to do weight restrictions comes to be a problem.
But that's where I'm saying you use the the customary business that happens in a neighborhood. So every once in a while, you're going to see a big semi pull up and deliver furniture or whatever, and they're probably exceeding the weight limits of that, but it's okay. And I still see that as a customary. If it's once a day, it's customary. It's the multiple trips per day in a vehicle that greatly exceeds the weight capacity of the road that I would be more concerned about.
Well, and so we do have that language that talks about the customary and incidental nature of the use. And then we also have shall not result in incompatibility or disturbance to surrounding residential areas. So if you did have that user, that would potentially be a trigger in a code violation. And then we currently have it drafted so that the vehicles are screened from the right-of-way, but that certainly could be revised to say are screened from the right-of-way and any, neighboring homes.
Yeah, I like that if we did add that.
I just want to throw in a couple. There's a lot of policing going on, how to enforce all this stuff. And when we talk about Minco coming in, if you drive up Kettle River, there's a young man that works at Ziegler. He has a Ziegler truck in his yard. And then you go farther up, there's a Hawkins Chemical up there. And they're driving on roads that are legal, weight limits and stuff like that. So I look at this as being a mess, trying to enforce it or try to narrow it down. I can see where you're talking about, Janet, someone going in and out. Or like Elizabeth said, landscaping, there used to be somebody on Notre Dame had 13 plows sitting in his yard. I mean, these are off the rigs, and he had 4 or 5 trucks, all day and moving around and stuff. I can see that issue, but, it's 5 acres, or what. We're a little different than, like Barb was saying. I can see Roseville, the houses are a little closer, and there's no place to park them, so they eliminate them. But here, I think when you got, and then try and screen something. How do you screen an 18-wheeler? Throw a canvas over it, or it's just it's hard to police. I think we got to narrow it down to operating out of that house more so than just coming home.
Well, and I think you have to make a distinction between someone who's taking their company truck home at night because that's what they drive every day versus someone who's has a company truck because that's their business. The house is their business. I mean, somebody taking their Midco truck home and parking it in their driveway, I don't have an issue with that. I mean, or Ziegler or whatever. I mean, that's how they get, that's their transportation, you know? So I don't have a problem with that. I'm just,
But Ziegler's only 5 miles down the road.
I know, but you know, like our guys can take their trucks home, right? Okay, well, never mind. Don't listen to that. So, in some cities, they can take their trucks home, right? And they don't have to like drive here and pick it up. So would we be, would that be a problem? No, it's not that isn't a problem to me.
Here's a question. So if it's okay to have a Midco truck or a Ziegler truck, why is it problematic to have an Al's Plumbing truck? So long as the use is restricted to the 30% of the accessory building, so long as there are no employees coming onto the site, what's the policy distinction between those?
I don't have a policy. I'm okay with that. I mean, I don't have a problem with that as long as it's not a semi that comes 13 times a day and is exceeding the weight limit of the road.
Can I make one comment? A lot of cities do require that you totally house the vehicles you're talking about. If we limit 30% of a building, then the truck driver
Yes.
never get it. He's
Nope,
going to
you're right.
build
Yep.
a building 12 times bigger than he needs because he can only use 30%. Just keep that in mind. This is a can of worms, by the way, this issue you're doing. It is different in every community, and no matter how well you do it, a week later, you're going to figure out why you left something out or you didn't think of it. It's complicated. Don't overdwell on it. Go by your gut and continue to update it, because if you spend so much time on it, you're not going to agree amongst yourselves on what it was you intended to accomplish, and you'll get nothing done.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yep, go ahead.
It kind of goes along with something Janet said a couple of weeks ago, and sort of what Dean is saying right now, just all these possibilities and things you didn't think of, and I personally was wondering about the employee thing and feeling like the no employee, you know, obviously you don't want, again, with the trucks, it's like there's a line somewhere with all of these issues, and I feel like having, you know, a person that comes and helps you out with a small business, I don't have a problem with that. Obviously, if somebody's got 16, 20 people, I mean, even some friends of ours were talking about someday starting like some childcare, and they were like, hey, you know, to my husband, you should do it with us, and that'd be cool. And I think in that situation, he would technically be an employee of their business or vice versa, you know, whatever. And so just feeling like that no employees is super limiting, and I could see multiple scenarios where something very, very, very reasonable and non-obtrusive, you know, would have somebody come in to help you out, but not in a way that's bothering anyone. And so that was something, I don't know, I was wondering what other people thought about that.
Well, I mean, the way that, this is Janet, so the way that things are sort of written now, you would move into the residential zone business that would require an IUP if you didn't meet the requirements of the home occupation. And I you know, I guess that's our next discussion, whether or not we want to totally eliminate that and follow the staff recommendations. But I mean, that's one option, is that you have 2 levels of this, and one requires a permit and one does not. But that's, I mean, that's what we were trying to simplify. So I think you go back to what are you trying to accomplish, just as Dean was saying, and you know, the primary purpose of a residential area is for people to have residences. And I think if you can do a business where it's not obvious that you're doing a business from your home, then we should try to figure out a way to make that happen and allow that to happen. But it's a slippery slope when you start talking about, you know, well, what if it's 1 people? What if there's only 2? Or what if there's 3? Or what if they're, you know, really small people? Or, you know, it's... Anyway, you get my point.
I'm just going to use the daycare as an example. when my kids were little, daycare was a lot different than a daycare center. When you do daycare from your home, you're only allowed so many kids, certain ages, whatever. If you're doing a daycare where you have to hire people to come and help you, that's a daycare center, and I don't think that's allowed. I mean, I think you have to go get a building to do that, because, I mean, you'd have to look, but when my neighbor in North St. Paul did daycare, her house, you're very restricted to ages of how many infants you can have, how many this, that. So I think when you're talking employees and opening a daycare center, it's not at home, it's at a building.
Yeah, and we do have, just to address that daycare question, we do have licensed daycare facilities that are allowed within residential properties as a permitted use within our code today. But again, the broader daycare center would not be allowed.
Oh, this is Barb again, going back to the truck thing. There are neighborhoods in Columbus that are not 5 acres or 2 acres. They're like little communities, because I've been to every house in this town, and there are some where I'd say, I'll take that because I can go zip, 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 zip. So how do you distinguish between those homes and the bigger, you have to make some kind of distinction or you have the same issue.
Well, I think that's where Megan was talking about, maybe you establish different rural residential zones, depending on the lot size, and then different things you might get. So that's more the phase 3 conversation.
Well, today it's a 5-acre minimum for a residential zone business.
Say that again?
I believe there's a 5-acre minimum for a residential zone business today.
In our code, I think you're right.
Yep.
There is. And that's something that certainly could be added to the home occupation definition, is that it's a code compliant lot. And I think that how we address many of these issues is through our PUD documents. And there could be potentially additional restrictions. I think that they're very much self-initiated by the community as compared to being initiated by, and that may be fine. Right, is that the community standard then for new smaller lots that are more intense, that are more along those suburban standards, are going to come together to determine what's appropriate and what they're going to allow through restrictive covenants that are aside from the decisions that you all make here.
I offer some more comments. The view that you might consider taking on this is that all of the community is what Barb was just mentioning, that it looks like St. Louis Park. It doesn't look like Columbus. There's small lots. You can see everything. In the purest sense, those neighborhoods don't want to allow a home occupation that is obnoxious, period. But I can tell you in almost all of the St. Louis parks, the Rosevilles, the Snap-on tool truck guy parks every night in that driveway. They're not making multiple trips. He's just bringing the vehicle home, and it fits.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those same communities don't allow boats in the driveway. They don't allow RVs in the driveway. It's a hot potato everywhere. But if you look at what would not be disruptive in any of your neighborhoods, forget the 50-acre parcel size, okay? Talk about the smallest lots in your community. Have that as your mindset. You're not going to have the piano lady that's got 4 people stacked up to take lessons because they can't accommodate them. And so that reasonable number has to be something. Never allow dance studio because that's 20 kids, not 2. But the hair salons, the home daycare without supplement. And my daycare provider, as my kids grew up, her business was good. She was making money and she wanted to bring employees in and finally got shut down because she was at the legal limit. But the city said, that's not a home occupation anymore. That's a commercial business. And so I agree with Lynn's remark. You got to draw the line somewhere. You're not allowing people to have a business opportunity at the expense of others. That's your goal. I've been a home occupation business owner. I have a corporation, for heaven's sakes. So you go to the Secretary of State and it says Resource Strategies Corporation, and it's moved 4 times in the last 4 years, and they're all single-family homes. I don't disrupt anybody, and that's the key to guide this. And then if you get to the point where you just don't see how you can continue doing residential zone business or any other name for something like it, is when you pull the plug and say, everybody has the right for home occupation, but we've been beaten up when we tried to go the next step because everybody abuses it. And so, again, I think keep your focus real tight, and what's fair is fair. And then just like the daycare, when it gets too big, you go to create a commercial center.
Well, you know, during COVID, a lot of hairstylists went and worked out of their house. But you know what? They're all going back into the salons now. The salon I go to, yeah, it was a ghost house because, you know, nobody was there. We were going to the stylist house, but they're all coming back and they want to be back out. I just think that you have to look, and how I look at it is the city is a business, okay? And we count on commercial taxes just like we count on residential taxes. And I learned this a long time ago when I got on the church council. Who would have thought the church was a business? And then you get that mindset that this is how it is. And there are businesses that you can do out of your house that you don't have employees, or you don't have the only person coming is the Amazon guy or the UPS guy. But there comes a time when some of these businesses, you have to say, you know what? We have commercial property available that we want to fill it. We want, you know, that's where you need to be, because that's where the city is going to make the biggest investment, and it's going to help the community. So you know, and it's going to get you noticed more than being in a daycare provider in a house, where if you have a little business and you have kinder care on the sign outside, you're going to get more business than if you're in your house.
So piggybacking off of that, Elizabeth, could you move forward 2 slides for me? I think it's helpful to talk about, so what happens, right? What happens if you adopt these standards, or even potentially slightly less restrictive standards, and a business is successful and that business grows and it's starting to have impacts on surrounding communities? So I have here a real live example, which is a company started by a young woman called See the Way I See. And so she manufactures, or she sews sweatshirts. And her sweatshirts talk about mental health issues, and they went absolutely viral on TikTok. And all of her TikToks were about how she was getting these sweatshirts stitched on her machine at home, and then she builds them and she utilizes her garage. And then she goes on Shark Tank, and she explodes. She gets, the sharks tell her, "You're doing a great job. You don't need our money. Just keep on working." And sure enough, she ran into city compliance issues because she was shipping out and she had people coming, picking up mailers. She had all of this new intense use out of her parents' garage, and she had to move to, and TikTok followers watched her move to a commercial warehouse. And so with that story in mind, that's going to happen as part of this process. There are going to be businesses that grow and that all of a sudden are too intense for the place that they're in. And that's where your code enforcement staff comes in. One of the things that Sean did, and I'll let staff speak to this, is, look at the history of complaints of all of these businesses out there. And there are very few. There are the known violators, the known offenders that are undergoing enforcement as we speak. But if a business does expand beyond what's appropriate for the community, that's where we take an enforcement stance. And we say, you are no longer consistent with the expectations of a customary and incidental home occupation. It is time for you to move. And when you say it's time for you to move, you can still be supportive of the business because you have the ability to enter into an enforcement agreement that says within 9 months you will do this, this, and this. And during those 9 months, you're going to mitigate your impact to your neighbors by doing this, this, and this. So you actually have an off-ramp for those businesses that may be inappropriate, who may have grown to a point that are no longer appropriate. So you can both work with them as well as have consistency across your district. And with that in mind, I'd like to move to talking about our existing IUPs and these more intense uses that Dean has described. So right now, the city has 6 existing IUPs for residential zone businesses. And it is our recommendation that as part of this, what I would call really a cleanup process, reestablishing what the expectations are for your residential district, again, pushing those uses to the commercial district, to say, at one point in time, interim use permits for more intense uses were appropriate for the city of Columbus, but these changing trends reflect that they are no longer appropriate. And in doing so, we will sunset those provisions. And there's a number of ways that you can do that. You can extend them for a fixed period of time. So everyone could receive an additional 10 years and then sunset, a wind down period. You can also continue them, and what many cities have done that have gone through this similar process have allowed those existing IUP holders to retain the rights around their IUP, subject to the conditions of approval at the time that they were granted, until the property is sold or conveyed. So the person who came in and applied for the IUP and said, yes, I can comply with these standards, is able to operate that business. Sold or conveyed includes rental. So if they were to rent it for the purpose of running a commercial business out of a home, that would be a conveyance, and that those IUP rights, I'll just put them as, sort of in quotation marks because they're not full rights, they're limited rights, would not transfer to a leasing entity. And so our recommendation would be to eliminate that flexibility within your code, but to preserve those rights until the sale or conveyance of the property. Subject, of course, to their conditions of approval. So if there was a violation of the condition of approval, if the use expanded dramatically, you would be able to revoke that interim use permit, just as you are today.
So I've thought about this a lot. There are 6 businesses that have IUPs. I know of 3 of them off the top of my head. And I don't know what the other 3 are. Of the 3 I know, 2 of them probably could continue on under our home occupation with some changes to the way they do things. I don't know about the other 3 that I don't know about. But it's a very small number. It's the red dots on here that we don't know what they do, or we do know what they do and they've created problems, that I think we really have to think about what we want to do with them. Because I think the 6 that exist, we can figure those out pretty easily. So I think you go back to what Dean said. I mean, if they're running a business that is impacting their neighbor and they don't have an IUP right now, they could see if they could meet whatever our new home occupation definition is, and probably lots of them can. And that'd be great. That would be a win-win for everybody. But if they can't, then you enter into, as you said, one of these agreements that says within a certain period of time, whatever is a reasonable period of time, they got to figure out a different place, and that's just how it's got to be. And I don't think it has to be any more complicated than that. I mean, even the ones that have current IUPs, those IUPs always had a time limit to them. None of them were intended to go on forever. That's why they had a maximum of a 5-year period. So I started to think about that, and I thought, I don't think we have to be shamed into believing that we're shutting down businesses. They were never intended to go on forever. That's why they had an IUP, not a CUP. There are some businesses in Columbus that are in residential areas that do have CUPs. I don't think they're on this map, at least the two that I know of weren't on there. But that's a whole different ballgame. That's not what we're trying to figure out. So that's my 2 cents. It got very simple when I thought about it that way.
So one of the things that I would put forward for your consideration is that, over the course of the last 24 months, there's been some uncertainty about how this process was going to go. And in that context, a number of your existing IUP holders did not move forward to renew their IUPs. And so one of the things that I think we want to be thoughtful about is that was based on our process as compared to their desire to comply. And so in that realm, I would recommend that even if you did not extend the IUP out till the time of conveyance, that you did provide for a specific window in which that you would sort of auto-renew those existing IUP holders for a period of time. Because I think we have a couple of IUPs that have expired, or that expired during the moratorium.
They expired and you gave
Yep.
them 18 months.
Okay. And so to further potentially extend those to allow for a wind down period, because they were really caught sort of in the middle of the policy-making space. And otherwise would have likely come in, applied for a 5-year renewal, and had that additional time to transition their business.
So what if to get rid of, or to, no longer offer IUPs, when they come in, we can renew it for 5 years, and with the agreement that at the end of the 5 years, they're either gonna be a business that goes in the commercial zone, or they're going to fit within our home occupation. That, this is something as a city, we're being proactive and we're getting rid of IUPs, and we're gonna do it for 5 years for you, so that you have 5 years to look at your options of where you might wanna retire and close your business, or if you wanna keep your business going, you're gonna fall under the home occupation, or you're going to go to a commercial district.
What do you do with families? So you got a family, and dad lets the son take it over. Is that a convenience?
I was going to ask that same question. The inheritance sort of the property, or the passing on of the property within families?
Right.
So it wouldn't be a conveyance as we have it currently defined in our code.
Only with the CUP.
Mhm.
We've had generational CUP.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean, in passing along?
On CUPs, do you have it on IUPs too?
The IUP businesses, I'm not aware of that they're generational, but the CUPs, I am aware that at least 3 of them are generational.
Well, and so, the real issue, of course, is that as they stand today, they have a defined period in which the use expires. And however, IUPs hold a sort of middle ground under Minnesota law. They sort of sit between a permitted use and a conditional use, in that they have to expire on a date certain, but that there are all sorts of sort of rights and responsibilities that are built up around these uses. And so the case law oftentimes talks about IUP renewals as having less legal right, having greater legal standing than a brand new IUP. And so when we're talking about a conveyance, we would, as proposed, staff has recommended that the IUPs terminate upon conveyance. We wouldn't necessarily consider, moving person inheriting a property as a conveyance. That certainly could be defined within your ordinance, but it very much to Commissioner's Ports, at Councilmember's point, is a simpler process to have a specific date certain. So, an extension of 5 years from this date for everyone for continuing compliance with IUPs as compared to the conveyance language.
So the outcome would be, we'll give you 5 years, then either you drop down to a home occupation. So we get our goal is to get rid of all the IUPs.
That's the recommendation. To phase them out over time.
I think of the very first one we did.
Well,
That was Kendall.
Yeah, but just remember, I mean, there are 6, and someone like him probably could fit the home occupation definition.
Kendall, the trucking that goes to California, down Notre Dame.
He's a one-person show.
But he stores more than 30% of his route.
Right.
He moved all of the trailers he had. It was just the truck that he was driving. And if we just said the truck that you're driving can sit in your driveway, doesn't have to go in because, it doesn't if it's, a company truck, then a situation like his would fit into home occupation, depending on what we finally land on.
Does this get into a lot of legal? I mean, you could really get.
That's why she's doing all the talking.
No,
I think the home occupation needs more space in the accessory building to make it work and to really have people have flexibility, but not more than 51%. So I would say something less than 50%. And then, yes, the Kendalls of the world can get his, stuff, you know what I mean, in the accessory building. And then I would say half of them can easily meet that. Tom Swenson, he has cars. He's not going to get it in 30% of the building. He sells, I forget how many cars a year, but he still needs space in the building to park the cars. He doesn't park them outside. So in order to get a lot of them, even for Dan's landscaping, he's got to get his stuff in a building. So I think if you're more flexible on the building, they'll be able to make it. And if you're strict, here's the rule: you build a big enough building to put your stuff in it to meet the code, or you don't get it. You have to go in the commercial district. That's the rule. There's the line.
but you take like Walduck's landscaping. Is that what you're talking about, or? Walduck.
On Potomac.
Yeah, wasn't that a Walduck? Is that his name, Dan? He used to have issues with that, didn't he?
And we did, and that's why he came in and applied for the permit, But ever since then, we haven't had any issues, he's, following the rules. But to tell him now, he's a one-man operation, to tell him now he can't have an IUP and he's got to move to the commercial district, I don't.
So Elizabeth, are you just suggesting that you increase it from 30% to 50% or less?
Something less, because then it's up to you. You build a 1,200 square foot building and you need 600 for it. I mean, he could easily do that. So that's the price you pay. If you're going to have a home occupation and you're going to in the idea is then you need a bigger building and you need to have a lot that can have a bigger building. Otherwise, you got to rent in the commercial district. I mean, I think it's a give and take, and that's the give and take in the community. You said, yes, you can have your business at home. Now you're going to build a building big enough to put your stuff inside.
So I think that's a reasonable suggestion. If you go to 50% or less, then you're not 51%. You're not over the maximum, and that sounds fine to me.
But it's a bright line. It's a bright line for Sean.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like, what are you using?
So what I hear in terms of going back to those home occupation standards, we have consensus that we're restricting it to the people who are living on the premises. We are with still conversation to be had about whether employees, but again, it's a much easier bright line if it is just for those residents of the property. We are moving to a 30%, not more than 50% of the floor area of any garage or accessory building to be used in conduct of the home occupation. That all of the permitted home occupations must be conducted entirely within the dwelling unit, garage, or existing accessory buildings. That we need refinement around the applicable fire and building codes to be clear about that language. That we are potentially considering weekend hours in terms of how we restrict those commercial and retail uses that are occurring within the home occupation. And then outdoor parking of commercial vehicles registered to the occupants of the residence would be permitted.
And I think the only other thing is I had suggested looking at the 4 parking stalls and maybe thinking, I don't know, my suggestion would be 2, but.
And
I would agree with that. 4 parking spaces is, you're not going to have 4 guests at one time in a small business. I mean, I've never, in all my years of my small businesses, have I ever had more than 2 people try and park at my business. I'm one guy. I can only handle 1 or 2 people at a time, and I think that allowing 4 is allowing for too many people. It is a residential area.
I agree.
Yep, I agree too. I do have a question, and I agree with everything that you've laid out. And I don't want to change anything, but my question has to do with, say, whether it's 30% or 50% of the outbuilding that can be used for the business. How do you know that they're actually using 30 or 50% of the building? Is our compliance officer allowed to go inside to confirm, or what if the property owner says, no, you're not coming on my property?
So one of the recommendations that you will see coming before you in terms of a code revision is to provide your compliance officer with that authority when a new occupation is opened, when there are specific triggers to allow for that.
Okay.
This is Barb. I have a question. We keep talking about an accessory building. Do we have a limit on how large they can be?
We do. We have performance standards with regards to accessory buildings within. And that's what the good thing is here too, is that if you have a very large lot, if you have the 80-acre lot, then you are permitted to have a much larger accessory building. But again, the growth of that would not impact the neighbors because you have all of that buffer space.
Well, I'm confused. I built a 1,200 square foot shop. Am I only allowed to use 600 square feet of it? If that 50%, I mean, I built it specifically for that use, and I use 100% of that space for my business. Am I now non-compliant? I know this was never anything that was brought up when I opened the business. It never said anything about.
And that's because you had an interim use permit and we allowed you to use the whole building.
Oh.
So that was the difference. So when you went through, there wasn't a requirement. There wasn't a requirement of a percentage.
Okay.
But now there is.
But now there will be. Correct. And so this is it's an excellent example to talk about when we're looking at the revisions to sunsetting that IUP provision, why there are some good policy basis to wait until conveyance of the property. So when the property turns over, it wouldn't allow another user to have that business operational in 100% of the outbuilding, but it would allow the existing user to do so.
Megan, I mean, again, we have 6. So do we even have to talk about this? I mean, if we had hundreds out there, I would definitely say, let's talk about it. We have 6, and pretty much we'll be able to deal with those 6. So I don't know that we have to talk about the hypothetical conveyance stuff. We know who the 6 are and what's going on there, and part of them are going to be able to probably fit under the home occupation, so.
Well, and one of the things that you absolutely can consider is giving discretion to your staff to put together a reasonable agreement for the winding down of the business, and that could vary based upon the needs of each one of those 6 users.
That's a good idea.
I bet the staff would love that.
Or do you not?
Go for it, Elizabeth.
Yes, we can do it. We can do it. We can do it. Right, Dean?
I feel like you just.
Oh, yeah.
Dean is losing his patience with the lawyers.
So Megan, I feel like you've solved all our problems tonight.
We still have to talk about phase 3, which we've already talked about. But moving to phase 3, it's something that I think is important for the Planning Commission in particular to keep in mind as you continue to study these uses. Is it appropriate? So for any concerns about those large 80-acre parcels that may be impacted uniquely by these revisions, that's where you have your off-ramp. Your off-ramp to think about what might be appropriate. Is it appropriate to have 2 distinct zoning districts, one very large lot district and one 5-acre lot district? And that is something for you to consider in the future and to tweak those districts to be reflective of the needs of the community as it grows, just as you've done within your commercial districts here and here.
Elizabeth, do we have area, I know we have large lots, but they aren't clustered together, right? So you couldn't actually point and say, this northwest corner are all 80 acres or more, and so therefore we're going to call that a rural residential 2 district where they can have horse farms and blah, blah, blah.
So let's just, a little caveat here. Do you have large lot areas that exist that have nothing on them? Yes, you do. Do you know why? Because they're underwater. So do you have large lots? I think the question is, how much usable lots do you have on large acres? And there are very few. I can think of 2 off the top of my head, but there are very few that are not literally underwater. They're 100% wetland, and that's why they're not developed today.
But to the point of creating another residential zone, we don't really have an area that fit. I liked that idea when I thought of it too, but it's like we don't really have an area like that you can point to and say, oh, all the parcels here are more than 40 acres.
Well, where are the large lots? On Furman, right? All that Thornbeck property.
Well, it's a Thornbeck property, but it's owned by, it's owned by one person. But that's what I'm saying. I can only think of 2 areas, that and the Waldox. That's it. Those are the 2 areas that I can think of. Everything else is underwater.
What about the one that was out north where they were thinking about raising cattle? Remember that about 1.5 years ago?
Hear you, Janet.
There was a property kind of north, closer to Carlos Avery. Remember they were going to have like orchards and bowls and.
Yeah, that was on a 5-acre lot.
I thought they had like 50 or 60 acres.
Nope, that was on the corner of Loyola and 181st. He had 5 acres.
And he was going to have bowls and cows and.
Yeah, he was. He was going to have a cow and pear trees and all these other things, and he was going to.
Okay, it doesn't matter. Yeah, it doesn't matter. I misunderstood the size of that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why I was worried, because I was like, how is it?
Rightfully so, yeah.
The only other one is the Jensen Farm that I forgot about, and that's in Ron's neighborhood. Because he's got, I want to say 160 acres.
Yeah,
Who is
maybe
that?
140. I don't think it's 160, but I think you're right.
But it's upland, you know what I mean?
It's good land.
It's usable, but those are functioning farms that I know of, that are upland. Oh, and the mayor's.
Yeah. But only 20 acres of upland out of all that. That's a trouble.
But that, to me, that's considered a large, to me, that would be large. But that's so scattered. You're talking about east side, west side. There's no one place clustered like that anywhere.
Well, and even aside from specific, large lot zoning district or changes of that nature, an applicant is always able to come before you and say, I think that this use is consistent for the property I'm purchasing, and I would like you to amend the zoning ordinance so that I can use it this way, just as we saw this evening. That remains an option, and is again, then you can make that determination wearing that policy hat at that point in time. So with that, I would appreciate any further feedback from the Planning Commission and the Council. And having sort of summarized the consensus that I've heard thus far tonight, I would ask for, if this group does agree, that we call for a public hearing on the revisions to the ordinance.
I think we're ready for that. I am.
Yeah. I mean, the only other thing I would add, again, is just it's not going to change anything that we talked about, but your example of horse trainers, I mean, they wouldn't meet that 30 or 50% rule if they had horses on their property. But again, I think that's ag, and I think it's different.
Yes.
So I think we need to just figure out how we incorporate the ag language into this.
Absolutely, and what we can do is update our memo when we come before the Planning Commission for the public hearing with that additional information about the agricultural use and how that plays out.
Okay, good, thanks.
Does everyone think we're ready to have a public hearing without having another meeting like this with all the revisions?
I do. I think we got it solved. I think she did an amazing job of bringing it all together. I'm super excited, after all this time.
All right, is there anyone against having or calling for the public hearing? There we go.
So I would make a motion to call for a public hearing at is it the October 18th meeting? I know there was a date in here somewhere.
Yes, October 18th.
October 18th meeting.
Okay, this is Sue. I'll second.
Are there any other questions or more discussion? If not, I'll start with Sue and call for the vote.
Sue, aye.
Ron, aye.
Do we vote or just council? Lynn, aye.
Janet, aye.
Judy, aye.
Barb, aye.
Rob and I.
Bethany.
And Bethany.
Bethany, aye.
And Jesse, aye.
Okay.
Hooray.
Moving on to number 8, Planning Commissioner's report.
I won't be here.
Sue, do you have anything to report?
It's fine. I don't have to be here. on the-
No, I think it's the planning commissioners get to
Planning
report.
Commissioner.
Where are you going?
Yes, I do. So,
Ben and Jerry's.
thank you to everybody that came to the Fall Fest last week. I know this isn't a planning commission thing, but I'm gonna do a shout out anyway. So Karen Fleming and myself co-chaired the event, and Janet had written an email that it takes a village. It doesn't take a village, it takes a community. And I think that last weekend was a sure sign of community in Columbus. And if I forget anybody, I'm sorry, but even if you made phone calls or just came and volunteered that day, I mean, everybody's piece in this was huge. The Lions did a fantastic job. I've never met Gina before until this, and she is amazing. But I want to thank Janet was our council liaison, and she kept us on track with emails and what we needed to do. Elizabeth and Lori. Lori was our note taker, and I know there were a few times she was nervous when we'd come up with things, and I got to check with Elizabeth. But city staff that was there that day, would you please convey that? I mean, every aspect of this festival was huge and great, and the car show guys did a great job. But I do want to highlight our businesses because When Karen and I first sat down to do this and we were told how much money we had to deal with, we both kind of looked at each other and went, oh. So we said we were going to raise 10,000 and we went over that. And so it was amazing to just see the businesses pour into the community, because basically that's what they did to help us put on a great festival. So it was Camping World, Ryback, Blaine Brothers, Dave's Hydrovac, Olson Sewer, Spire Credit Union, Potomia's Roadways, K1 Auto Body, Waldock's, Bergen's. Who's that one? My eyes are tired, so I'm.
Forest Lake Trailer.
Oh, Forest Lake Trailer, Biking, Westmore. But I do have to share, and I want to do a shout out to Running Aces. They never want to take credit, but Friday night was amazing. But we had 4 businesses sponsor races, and 2 of the races, a horse was retiring. So Dave's Hydrovac was the first one. And the horse that retired is the richest racing horse in Minnesota. And he had all his employees and their families out there. I mean, attendance-wise, they were there. One of the guys bet on the horse with his $2 freebie ticket and $160. And he was just so excited. So it really, and then Ziegler, they named their race Ziegler Cat Classic. So that was the best name of the race. So I think it was a good time by all, and thank you to everybody. Like I said, you don't do it by yourself, and it was a great effort of community, city, businesses, and everybody that came together. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Nonprofits.
Thank you.
Barb?
I just wanted to comment, I did volunteer with the Bouncy House and the Touch-A-Truck, and what impressed me is when I was a kid, I lived in Mankato, Minnesota, and it was so much like the community festivals that we used to have when I was a kid, where the kids were so excited. They were just having a ball, and it just really made me understand how many new families we have here, because it was just amazing, the involvement of the kids and the sense of community. And I must mention the Sheriff's Department too, because the things that, the drone and the dog, and I mean, the kids were just thrilled with it. So I think it really, in that sense, the human level was just amazing.
Yeah. Robin?
Got nothing.
Bethany?
Bethany?
I'm bummed I missed this weekend. That's all.
Well,
Sounds like it was fun.
it was.
Good job, everybody.
Get ready, next year is right around the corner. Anybody else? Any council members have anything to say? No? Janet, I'll say thank you for spearheading this whole thing.
Yep, you're welcome.
When you said you wanted to do a fall festival,
There were doubters amongst us, wasn't there?
I wasn't totally
It was
convinced.
fun to prove you all wrong.
Well, you did, so that was good.
Yep.
So, anything, what's next? Elizabeth,
No report, Mr. Mayor.
that's it. Motion to adjourn?
Elaine,
Oh,
does she have any?
you have anything for us? No?
So I would move to adjourn.
In a second.
I'll second.
I'll call for the vote.
Sue, I.
Ron, aye?
Lynn, I.
Janet, aye.
Judy, aye. Barb, aye.
Rob and I.
Bethany, I.
And Jesse, aye. Our meeting is adjourned for this evening. Thank you, everyone.